Hello, everybody. We seem to have lost Jim Clark. Lee's joined us. Hello, Lee. Lee, can I hear you? No. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay, good. I can't hear you. You're not on mute. We got 3 minutes left to go, and we lost Jim. Bring him back, Alan. Bring Jim back. Okay. Well, I'm glad all these little glitches are happening before the show starts. I'm here by myself, but I'm ready to kick it in. I've got my cup of peach tea tree. I had a fresh peach, and it was so good. And I just cut it up and put it in some hot water. And it's good to have a little throat quencher. You know, here I am on the show, 9:30 in the morning, and you're the first folks I've spoken to so far today. You roll out of bed, you look at the news on the internet, you make yourself a cup of coffee, a little bowl of cereal, whatever you're having for breakfast, a piece of fruit. And this morning, my piece of fruit was a peach, which I put into the tea. And I don't really speak to anybody. Next thing I know, the show's beginning, and I still got horses in my throat or frogs in my throat. But that's okay. Maybe I should log off. We got 1 minute left to go. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is log off and come back in as well, just in case I'm the problem. Be right back, folks. I am live now. Good morning, everybody. And there's Lee.
Can you hear me now?
Sweet.
Great.
Summer breeze.
Great.
Very good. Okay. And we're still waiting on.
Okay.
Well, let me take a quick look here. Oh. Lee, you don't have. Are you doing a book club segment today?
I don't know. I don't think it's on the list, but I have one that we may be saving from next time. I don't know.
Okay, very good. Well, I'll tell you what, Jim Clark is so erudite. He can talk. Well, I don't think we're going to have any trouble with the length of the show today.
I read some of the Pineapple Anthology #3 last night, and also some of the Secret History, whatever I could find quickly on Kindle. Interesting stories, you know. Things that I don't know a lot of Florida history anyway, but very, very interesting, and you know, just the kind of thing you sit down and you just want to keep reading. It's not like a big thick history book.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's really opened my eyes up through this show, and you've had segments on regional authors. We're talking about Florida today. You know, every nook and cranny of this country has its subset of local regional authors, and in many cases associations with you know, more famous authors that either summered in those places or wintered in those places or had a cabin in Montana. And I've gained a much better appreciation for the regionality of American press.
Right. Well, let me ask you something that I saw in the AARP magazine this week, a program in Portland called Street Books.
Oh, yeah.
You know about that?
I do. I actually do on Thursdays with my church. We feed under the bridge,
right?
And the Street Books comes by with their bicycles and their books, right. and you know, hands them out and trades them. And yeah,
sounds like a great idea. Just a great idea.
Folks. Yeah. I think we're finally getting the homeless situation. We've got a plan up here now. We're opening up 6 new camps around the city with little houses. And we'll see how that goes. Hey, let me check the time here. It looks like we're at 9:31. I haven't seen the countdown. I'm going to assume we're ready to go. What do you think, Lee?
It says, yeah, it looks like it's time.
Okay. The only thing is our first guest isn't on the show, so I don't know what happened.
Well, we might be doing book club after all, huh?
Maybe. Let me dial in here real quick. Good morning, Warren. Warren's joined us. You're such a loyal. Warren, you were up here in Portland as well. We're talking about the street books in Portland. You were up here as a librarian at one of our local colleges, isn't that right? I'd like to learn more about that sometime. All right,
we should get Warren to just join us one day.
I've been thinking about a good segment, but I think we should just have him talk about just come on the show. Warren, before August, pick a day in August, Warren, that's going to work for you, and we're going to have you join us on the show. And I can't seem to get it on my phone either. All right, we'll just keep on. Hey, good morning, everybody. We've started. That's what happens when you're doing live. Welcome to the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. I'm your host, Ed Markowitz from Montgomery Rare Books in Portland, Oregon. And with me is my co-host, Lee Lynn from...
I've been promoted.
I'm not taking full responsibility for this
today.
I'm going to start sucking you in on some of this responsibility. Lee Lynn from Ridge Books in Calhoun.
Good morning, everyone.
The Rare Book Cafe is the only weekly video program live on the internet devoted entirely to rare and collectible books, the book ecosystem, the people who love them, and that's YOU. Good morning, everybody. It's 9:30 out here in Portland, Oregon. I'm still sipping on my peach tea. 12:30 where Lynn is. I think it's 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time. But every time, every day, 24/7, you can find us recorded on YouTube or here at Facebook. Additionally, we're now on a number of podcasts, wherever Google Podcasts and other podcasts are freely given away. Take us with you. Put us in the car. Take us out of the car. Don't let us suffocate if the temperature gets above 100. We're a virtual cafe. With me today, or with me at any moment, is Florida historian Dr. Jim Clark in Orlando, Florida. Our regular Lee Lynn. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning. I have spent this morning at a production of Aladdin Jr. featuring my grandchildren, including my 6-year-old grandson as the Sultan. The youngest cast member and the smallest in full Sultan regalia.
Oh, how much fun.
It was. And we hope tonight goes a little more smoothly than this morning because part of the set fell down this morning.
Oh, this is a summer production, a school production?
The Art Center here has a theater camp.
Summer camp?
Okay. For children from 6 to 16. And they last for 2 weeks. And then they divide into 2 casts, and each cast does 2 productions. So we're back at it tonight. It was fun. It was fun. My granddaughter had about 4 different roles, and one of them was one of the princes that's a Jasmine suitor. And for some reason, they forgot to put her in a prince costume, and so she came out in her handmaiden's costume instead. So we hope maybe that's going to be corrected by tonight.
Not the handmaidens.
No. Jasmine's handmaidens.
Oh,
Jasmine has 3 handmaidens. And so she wore that costume for her performance as Prince Abdullah.
I'll tell you the thing I am looking forward to so much. I know society is opening back up, but I can't wait for live theater to return.
Oh, I know. And concerts. Oh, my goodness.
Concerts, yes. Usually out here in Oregon, October is the start of the theater season, and I'm looking forward to see what's going to make it to production this year.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of music venues in Chattanooga that are convenient to get to and have. I'm a more or less a country bluegrass type fan.
Okay.
And a lot of my favorites play in Chattanooga, and there are a number of us who generally go, and we have really missed it this year.
Yeah.
Because we average about once a month or once every 2 months.
You never realize how much you miss it until it's gone.
No.
All right, folks, later on in the show, after Dr. Jim Clark makes it, we'll be visiting with another regular contributor. That's Gigi Best, and with our old friend Richard Morey. Gigi is going to have a segment with us on the Freedmen's Bureau. Not something I heard a lot about, but it's quite a moving story. And then Richard Morey, I think he picked up a couple interesting things at the Mart out there in Massachusetts. So, but now we're going to start in live. Jim, hello, welcome back. I don't know if you've met Lee yet.
No, we haven't. Good morning, Jim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine.
Good morning.
Everybody, Dr. Jim Clark is a senior history lecturer at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. He's also the author of 9 books about Florida history. Count them, folks, 9. He is also the author of 9 books about Florida history. These are remarkably well-researched, insightful. I find them kind of, just the spurs, the sideshows in some cases of Florida history, as well as putting together 3 anthologies of fiction for Pineapple Press. Jim, welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why do authors gravitate to Florida, Jim?
One of the problems we have in Florida is that people don't know our history. Almost everybody, it seems, came from another state. And maybe in their younger days, they took Ohio history or Michigan history, but they come here and don't know how wealthy our history is. It is unbelievable. And especially in writing, think about this, that more than half a century before the Pilgrims got here, before the Jamestown settlers got here, Florida had already produced a small library of poetry, of heroic tales, all kinds of things. Again, you could fill a small library with all the things written about Florida before the British even got here.
Exactly. And to this day, authors continue to gravitate to Florida. I understand we've got some really big names living down there.
Yeah, people certainly have heard of James Patterson, who is in Palm Beach now. Jimmy Buffett, the songwriter and book writer, has moved uptown from Key West to Palm Beach. Miami has been a gathering place for writers for a number of decades now. And Sarasota and Key West, of course. Sarasota traces its writing history back to McKinley Cantor, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning Andersonville in the 1950s. He talked his friend John D. McDonald into moving to Sarasota, and that touched off kind of a stampede of writers moving there. In fact, there's a writers organization that meets in a local restaurant every Friday afternoon that's been meeting for more than half a century. And the best known writer there today is, of course, Stephen King. So they have a tremendous writers colony there. Key West, historically, since the 1920s, has drawn writers. So just hundreds of writers. There's almost not been a time when there was not a Florida writer on the bestseller list.
Why is it that the crime mystery genre is so strong down there? You look at people like Carl Hyacin. What do these folks have in their background that gravitate them towards those popular books?
Well, yeah, I think it's journalism. Just in the last couple of years, Florida Man has become kind of famous all over the country.
Word.
But as you and I know, we've been seeing these weird people, and as somebody said, if you're stuck to write a story, just wait an hour and a body will wash up on the coast, and you'll have your story. And so if you look at journalists who have have made their mark here. The first one going back to H.L. Mencken. H.L. Mencken came here to cover the Jacksonville fire and wrote some really strange pieces about how his real mission wasn't to report on the fire, but to report on how great his newspaper was for sending rescue supplies, which apparently included lots of bourbon. But we've had Dave Barry, of course, at the Miami Herald. We've had Carl Hyacin from the Miami Herald, Randy Wayne White from Fort Myers, Michael Conley, another great mystery writer from the Daytona Beach News Journal and the Fort Lauderdale Sun Sentinel. So I think all of these people at one time or another covered the police beat and found things that we know in Florida actually happened and turned them into great novels. And of course, I shouldn't forget Edna Buchanan, the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who covered the cops in Miami and who went on to write mystery novels. So we have a rich history of journalists turned writers.
Kind of overflows into the entertainment industry because you also have Scarface, Miami Vice, and Dexter.
Oh, Dexter, one of my favorites.
That's exactly right. I'm sorry, say again, Lee?
I said Dexter was one of my favorites. The series.
And Jeff, of course, was honored just a few years ago in St. Augustine, and has done a great job of writing. And it's just an endless list of people who have written about Florida.
I remember
some of them still living.
I remember starting to read some of Randy Wayne White's books several years ago and thinking, wow, this is a whole different. I love mysteries, but I kind of gravitated toward English, cozies and things like that, and found White's just fascinating because it was such a different environment and, just a really different type of mystery for me. I've really enjoyed those.
Yeah, and of course, another journalist that people have kind of forgotten, but who was very popular in his time was Pat Frank out of Jacksonville and Mount Dora, who wrote Atlas Babylon, which was kind of one of those doomsday books that sold millions of copies in the 50s and made him a national star. So I don't know, maybe there's something in the water about Florida that writers come up with unusual plots.
Jim, we're going to get back to authors here in a minute. I'd just like to remind everybody that you're listening to the Rare Book Cafe, and you can hear us at your podcast at the Rare Book Cafe Raw. Later in the show, we're going to have Things Found in Books, our great weekly segment. Gigi Best is going to be joining us talking about the Freedmen's Bureau, and Richard Morey picked up some very interesting books that he's going to tell us about. He finds them to be quite rare, and I hope he got them at a good price. All right, Jim, I want to turn the conversation back to you for a moment. Putting your modesty aside, let me ask you, does Florida have a state historian, and why are you not it?
I don't know why Florida does not have a state historian, although you'd probably get... Pardon?
Do you know if there's a state poet in Florida?
There has been a state poet. I'm not sure the job has been filled recently. Somebody asked me that about a month ago. I'm not sure the governor has filled that. But as far as state historians, you have a number of candidates, including Gary Mormino over there in St. Petersburg at the University of South Florida.
Is there a state historical society?
There are a lot of candidates.
Do you have a single state historical society, FHS?
We do. The Florida Historical Society is out of Cocoa Beach. It's one of the earliest. It goes back almost a century and a half.
Wow.
So, one of the things about Florida is that because during World War II, we were the least populated state in the South. there just weren't a lot of people here. People
Really?
weren't paying attention to Florida. And so most of its history has not been written until the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. There are things, I'll give you an
I'm shocked.
example.
What, you're now number 4? You're now number 4 electoral college?
We only had we had a population of about 500,000. I think we had 4 or 5 votes in the electoral college. Yes.
No, but I mean now you're, I think, number 4 in the electoral college.
We're going to be number 3. We're going to go up to, I think, 29
wow.
when the dust settles. So, but people were not writing.
I had no idea.
Yeah, people were not writing our history until recently, and the best example is Groveland, for which Gilbert King won the Pulitzer just 3-4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now. The horrors of Groveland that had been around since 1950. They're just the Harry T. Moore killings. Nobody wrote about them for about 40 years. Ben Green did his excellent book there. So there's so much in Florida to write about that people have not written and that come as a surprise to readers. I tell people stories and they go, no, that couldn't have happened. And, some people, a lady down in Lee County made me send her a copy of a story from the Historical Quarterly when I wrote about Robert E. Lee being in Lee County. And she said, that couldn't be. How could he have been in? There was no Lee County back then. But people don't realize how rich our history is. And I encourage people who want to write to look into doing local history, things like that, because it is a booming market.
Let's talk about a couple of your history books. You've got one out there called Red Pepper and Gorgeous George. Are you going to tell me that there's some sort of connection between Gorgeous George, the wrestler, and the famous Senator Claude Pepper?
Not at all. Gorgeous George was George Smathers, who was nicknamed Gorgeous George by his opponents, who said he was only getting elected because of his good looks. And he ran in 1950 against Senator Claude Pepper in what many believe was the nastiest Senate race in history. And he defeated the incumbent Claude Pepper, who later came back as a U.S. congressman. But strangely enough, it was the Washington Post that tagged Claude Pepper as Red Pepper because of his stands on communism. People assume it was some political foe, but it was actually the liberal Washington Post that did it.
I thought it was the color of his hair when he had some.
No, no. I don't know what color his hair was.
When you say vicious,
now,
give us an example of what viciousness was back in those days.
The best story that lingers on that's not true is that supposedly that there was a speech, the famous speech where Pepper used big words to confuse the rural folk. My sister was a thespian in wicked New York, is one of the lines from that speech. And it has taken off. You can Google that speech, and people have added to it over the years, and it's now like a 20-minute speech. But it never happened. But people were hurling charges, racism charges, all kinds of things. Smathers talked about people spitting on him. At one point, a man walked up to him and slugged him. So it was a vicious election. And strangely enough, pardon?
So not much has changed in our country.
Not much has changed. And surprisingly enough, the person watching it, the election, the primary in Florida was in May before all the other elections in the country. The person watching it most closely was Richard Nixon, who was a friend of Smathers, who was running for the Senate in California. and who modeled his Senate campaign after the Smathers campaign. Nixon branded his opponent, Helen Douglas, as the Pink Lady. Again, red pepper, Pink Lady. So it became kind of a template for others. Barry Goldwater used it in Arizona to get elected to the Senate. People would come to Smathers and say, "How did you do it?"
Good story, which actually is right in my wheelhouse. What I mostly collect and sell is presidents and politicians. I think you've got another book out there called Presidents in Florida. Speaking of Richard Nixon, any other good anecdotes of our presidents in Florida?
Yeah, my favorite actually is a couple favorites. One is the first president to come to Florida is Chester A. Arthur, one of our forgotten presidents. He comes to Kissimmee in the central part of the state, and he wants to go fishing. And so they all go down to Kissimmee, and they're going to go fishing. And when they are about to leave, his aides come up to him and they say, "Gee, we don't want to go fishing." And he said, "What are you talking about? We came all the way from Washington to go fishing." And they say, "Well, the people here have told us they can introduce us to something we can't do in Washington." And Arthur says, "What's that?" And they say, "Well, they're going to take us out on the lake and let us shoot alligators." So they all go out on Lake Toho except Arthur, who's determined to go fishing. And a local man says, "Hey, there's this great fishing up here in this creek." And sure enough, he finds the creek, and it's wonderful. It's paradise. He comes back saying, "This is the greatest spot in the world." What's amazing is that 80 years later, Walt Disney will go to the same creek, Reedy Creek, and build Disney World on the shores of Reedy Creek.
Wow.
So, both there are two people who thought it was great, but my Chester A. Arthur could not go south of Kissimmee. This is the president of the United States, is forbidden to go south of Kissimmee, Florida in 1883. Lee, you want to guess why?
Something to do with Native Americans. ...
Yes. The telegraph. There was no telegraph south of Kissimmee, and he could not be out of touch with Washington. So it shows how remote Florida was as late as 1883. Wow. The other story I love is George Smathers, the senator we just talked about, and Richard Nixon were best friends. And after the 1968 election, there was a rumor that Nixon was going to appoint a Democrat to his cabinet. And word spread that the Democrat was going to be George Smathers, and it was going to be Attorney General. So this rumor took off, and finally the call came, and an aide said, "Senator Smathers, President-elect Nixon would like to call you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So Smathers assembled his family there waiting for the big call. And sure enough, 10 o'clock, the phone rings, and Nixon says, "George, I need to ask you a favor." And Smathers says, "Anything you want." And Nixon says, "Well, let me tell you, nope, you don't even have to say it. Anything in my power to do for you, I'll do." And Nixon says, "Well, don't you? Nope, you don't even have to say anything. Just tell me what you want and I'll do it." And Nixon says, "Well, okay, I want you to sell me your house in Key Biscayne." And so there was no cabinet appointment. And of course, that became the Key Biscayne White House, the compound that Nixon built, eventually acquiring 2 more houses.
And of course, a recent president also domiciled himself in Florida. Any others?
Yeah, we have a rich history. Florida has never had a president until Donald Trump kind of adopted us. Vermont's had 2 presidents. Hawaii's had a president. We've never had a native son be president, a state politician. Marco Rubio has run. Bush has run. Lawton Childs played with it. Bob Graham played with it. Reuben Askew ran. So lots of people have made noises, but we've never been able to elect a Floridian to the White House. And now, of course, Donald Trump, has claimed Florida as his home. But of course, there's another Floridian, Governor DeSantis, who would like to be president. So we'll see how that works out.
How about Harry Truman? Didn't Harry Truman have a place down in the Keys?
Yeah. People forget Harry Truman was perhaps our poorest president. I mean, he didn't have any money. The story is when he left the White House, he had $81 in his checking account. And so he couldn't afford a big, expensive vacation. The Navy said, hey, if you go to Key West, you can travel on a Navy ship, Navy airplane. There's a house there at the Navy base you can stay at. The Navy will cook your meals and clean the house and everything. And so he fell in love with Key Biscayne. This is amazing to me, Ed. Of his 8 years in office, he spent a total of 8 months in Key West, so a month a year. Oh. And on perhaps his most famous trip was in 1947 when he dedicated the Everglades National Park, which saved much of the Everglades.
Did the press didn't pillory him for being away for a month?
No, that was fairly common back then. And the press went down. They got to have a nice vacation. He played golf with reporters and aides, and they all went fishing. And so it was kind of a vacation for everybody.
Lee, even Georgia has its own president.
Yes, we certainly do. And one thing that's said around here about Carter may be that he was the best ex-president we've ever had. And Calhoun has a fairly close connection to Carter because his oldest son, Jack, married a girl from Calhoun. They divorced fairly soon, but she and her family all still live in Georgia. And her son, Jason, Jimmy's grandson, ran for governor of Georgia several years ago and did not win. But he is now very active with the Carter Library, the Carter Center in Atlanta. And so up here we have very fond memories of our ex-president. And then, of course, Roosevelt spent a lot of time in Georgia at Warm Springs.
Yeah, and of course, that's where he died in 1945. One of those when I studied the death in school, he was having his portrait painted and working very hard. And of course, 30, 40 years after the fact, we found that he was really with his mistress in Warm Springs and had left Eleanor at home. So, great story about Roosevelt's death in Warm Springs. But you're right, Lee. Carter has become perhaps, next to John Quincy Adams, the best former president we have had. And
JQ went back into the Congress, didn't he?
Yes, and that's where he made his mark as an anti-slavery representative, doing far more than he did as a president. Although, we don't give him any credit. He's the one who bought Florida for the United States. He worked the deal, and the treaty is called the Adams Treaty. So he was a great lover of Florida, and also is responsible for much of the lumber industry in North Florida. So we have presidents always involved.
There are 2 new biographies of Carter that are either out or coming out. There's been so much publicity lately with his and Rosalind's 75th wedding anniversary, and so a lot more interest in that. When he was elected, I was at a workshop in Cordele, and we got to go over to Plains when he came home to Plains after the election in 76. It was a great experience, a lot of fun.
Jim,
Yeah, there are
shameless self-promotion is never beneath us on this show. So why don't you tell us about your new book?
Well, I have a new book out called The History Lover's Guide to Florida, a big, thick book, actually, which has everything you want to know about Florida history and where to visit Florida history. Florida history is everywhere. We don't realize things, and there are places in Florida I'd love to go to. I've never been to Fort Jefferson. Ed, have you ever been down there to the Dry Tortugas?
No, I have not. I've done St. Augustine, but that's it.
Yeah, you can reach it only by boat or by seaplane. And
was it a coastal defense battery?
Yes, it was a major fort, along with Fort Zachary Taylor in Key West, and Fort Clinch on the East Coast, and the fort in Pensacola, all built as forts and all useless by the time they were finished. That they were bypassed by technology. So many people believe they're the first government boondoggle, that they built all these forts that were useless.
Where was Dr. Mudd sent? When he was imprisoned, and then
Fort Jefferson.
It was at Fort Jefferson,
right? Which is at the tip of the Keys,
yeah.
Tip. It has no water, no plumbing, nothing really.
And they had
so if you go there,
had a major, was it a yellow fever outbreak there when he was there?
I think yellow fever or smallpox. Yeah, I can't.
Or one or the other.
And he cured people. Yeah. And was released from prison early.
Before we let you go, talking about interesting facts in history of Florida. Tell us about rum runners. Florida is famous for being close to the Caribbean there, and the rum and illegal liquor trade that went through the state.
I've always remarked, I'm fascinated by this. If you go back and look at old newspapers, for example, in the 1800s, early 1800s, the Coast Guard was patrolling the coast for slave runners, people illegally bringing in slaves into the Florida coasts. By the 1920s, the Coast Guard headlines were looking for rum runners. And of course, in the 1970s, the Coast Guard was looking for drug dealers. So the Coast Guard, we've kept busy here in Florida for 200 years. We were so close to Bimini and so close to Cuba that literally you could sail. Bimini had built 9 warehouses the size of football fields, and it was full of liquor. So you could take your little boat over to Bimini, and especially for these farmers, remember, this is the 1920s. They don't have any money, and they could make as much in a night running rum or beer or whatever as you could make in a year farming. So you had all these boats traveling, little tiny boats, big boats, going over to Bimini, going down to Cuba. And remember, the advantage Florida had was this wasn't, as they say, bathtub gin made in Chicago. So the rum runners had a field day, and Florida's coasts were so empty back then, you could pull into a little jetty and there was nobody there.
Great story, Jim. You've got so many. I hope you'll come back someday.
I would love to. Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Well, I'm really sorry that you've ruined our idea that Pocahontas saved John Smith. I was reading that story in one of your books last night, how John Smith had stolen the story about being saved by Pocahontas from a Florida Indian.
That's right. It happened to Devaka, who was captured by the Indians and was being death. And the chief's daughter said, "Spare him because I love him." And John Smith, decades later, read that story and and stole it for his own book, made up the Pocahontas story. I'll leave you with one quiz. Ready, Lee?
Okay.
Here's your question. Okay. They placed Devaka to kill him. They placed him on a raised platform made of trees, okay, and lit a fire under him.
Right.
Got that?
Right.
All right. What is the Tamunquin word for what they were doing to him?
I read that. Barbacoa. Or
barbecuing. Yes. That's where we get the word barbecue.
Yes.
So, it's the only Tamunquin word I know. So next time you have a barbecue, I want you to think of Devaka in 1828 being roasted alive.
Excellent. All right, listeners out there, if you've been as fascinated by this discussion with Dr. Jim Clark as I have been, check out his website, drjimclark.com, and pick up his latest book, Facts You'll Find in Florida, Presidents from Florida, and anything from the Pineapple Press that Lee was reading from last night. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Now it's time for Gigi Best. Gigi, always a pleasure from Gigi Best. Where is she? Is she here?
Yes.
Oh, okay. There you are. Gigi, I can't say the whole complete name of your store without having it in front of me. Give it to me again. The Gigi Best.
Best Richardson African Diaspora Literature and Culture Museum.
Got it.
Oh, that's it.
Okay. And there you are, adorned with your Sunday hat. Good morning. Good afternoon.
This is kind of a sun hat, not the Sunday one. My Sunday one has like flowers and a little bit fancier. This
I'm
is
a guy. What do I know?
Yeah, this is go to the beach hat.
And will you be later in the day?
No, I doubt it. It's too hot. It's too hot to be out there.
How hot is it there? It's 92 here.
Well, the other day it said it went up to 103. So it's in the high 90s.
So everybody, after the Civil War, the federal government, in an effort to aid in the Reconstruction effort, established a bureau for the quote unquote relief of freedmen and refugees. And the purpose was to provide food, shelter, clothing, medical services, and land to displaced Southerners, including newly freed African Americans. You know, Gigi, I have to tell you, this wasn't in my high school history books. Another thing that wasn't in my high school history books. Tell us about it. Okay,
the Freedmen's Bureau, and I have a pamphlet here that that's put out by the Library of the National Archives and Records Administration. And it says it helps you with African American family research. And one of the first things they mention is the records of the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Now, one thing that a lot of people, and I thought, you know, like you were mentioning, that organization that was established was only for the African Americans or the people of color who had been freed. But it was to help the South, hopefully, because there were a lot of starving people. They were Confederate soldiers. Confederate soldiers had been killed, and their wives and their children. Some people lost their mother and their father. So what they were doing is they were trying to aid the people who were in distress. So they were giving out rations. And like you said, they established a bank, they established a hospital. And the fascinating thing for me, because I always have to make it personal, I have to bring it back to me. My fourth great grandfather, his name was Isham Locust. But when he entered the War of 1812, they called him Lucas. And that's happened a lot in my family, that they changed their name from Locust to Lucas. Well, Isham, on his pension record, when he applied for the War of 1812, he said he was Indian, and somebody wrote false. So back then they were trying to determine who was native and who wasn't. Well, now that I've done more research, I've found him under something called the Boston Fund. So the Boston Fund was operating in Robeson County. And by this time, he's considered elderly. So I see these different times that he was given rations, and it was also other people in the neighborhood. He wasn't the only one. And so to me, it just sounds odd, because here are these people in the South, and this place is called the Boston Fund. So evidently they go ahead.
I would say follow the money.
Yes. And so I saw or have seen a lot of bank records. Now, it is very informative when you look at the Freedmen's Bureau records, because let's say somebody had some money in the bank. They put on there who could access that money. And then they were also asked questions like, who was your mother? Who was your father? Who was your husband? Who are your children? Who are your siblings? So if you find some of those records, and this was established, like you said, by act of Congress, and it was under the War Department. So the War Department are the ones who sponsored these programs. So I was able to find relatives and people who had listed, because Family Search picked up a lot of these, and they're on Ancestry.com, they're on Family Search. And so if you're looking for an ancestor that kind of like just dropped off and you don't see them on another census, then you can look at the Freedmen's records and a lot of times find them. So the sad thing, and I'm going to tell you this, before I get to the other part, is the bank was mismanaged. And so a lot of the money by these people who were supposed to be helping the indigent people were stealing the money out of the bank. So eventually the Freedmen's Bank collapsed, and the whole Freedmen's Bureau, it ended in 1872, because at that point they didn't think it was a purpose. So when they were handling abandoned lands, a lot of people after the Civil War had their lands taken from them, and a lot of them tried to fight to get their land back. It also acted as a court system. And I found a record on my husband's side of the family that one of his great grandfather's sister had went to deliver some, just let's say corn, to this man who had this granary or whatever. And she was like around 9, and the man's niece started bothering her, and who was European. And then the man came out with a stick and beat her. So the family went to the Freedmen's Bureau, like I said, that acted as a court, and said, this is what happened. And then I read that they finally got a hearing and they got $10, which was not much back then either. So they adjudicated a lot of problems with the land, where people say, this is my land, and somebody else says, no, it's my land. And it wasn't always fair, and it wasn't always given the right way. So it's a very important record. If you have access to, and it's pretty easy to get. Like I said, if you're on Ancestry.com, those records will come up. Family Search, which is free, those records will come up. So it's a very interesting part of our history that everybody doesn't know about. Now they had field offices in different places, and but they didn't have a field office everywhere. So in North Carolina, where my family's from, they had cities like Lumberton, Goldsboro, Wilson, but Raleigh and New Bern covered several counties. So they were in Mississippi, they were in Kentucky. So the Freedmen's Bureau was all over the South and trying to help people. In some places, it was only one field office. So you think about how much work that was. And I still can't. One thing I was able to find after it said that my great grandfather was not Indian. In the meantime, I've connected with a cousin through DNA, and from records of Robeson County, that's where the Lumbee Indians lived. So I did find documentation that he was a Lumbee Indian. So when he went there and he designated himself as Indian, he was. And so the Freedmen's Bureau has miscellaneous records. They gave out rations. They had the court cases. They had a freedmen's school, and also they helped people who were destitute. They had cohabitation records for people of African descent who were not permitted to marry. And then after they were freed, they were told, okay, you need to get married. And so some of them did and some of them didn't. But the rations that they gave out mostly was pork and corn. And they hired, some people hired, the Freedmen's Bureau hired people too and paid them to work. The civil cases were law level court cases. They managed abandoned lands because let's say you had a Confederate family that had land, and then after the Civil War, they were worried about what was going to happen. They moved to another state. So in a lot of situations, land was abandoned too.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
Okay. President Johnson tried really hard to get the Bureau disbanded, didn't he?
Yes.
Yes, saying that it was handouts that would keep people from, making their own way. And I think he used one argument that you've already refuted, which was that it was not just entirely for African Americans, but for other people, who were displaced by the war. And he used the excuse that it was discriminating against white,
but it didn't. And you know what? I say there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Because think about what's happening now.
Right.
And think about the checks we got, for people who were suffering, who've been put out of their homes because of COVID, who got so sick that they couldn't take care of their family. So it was the same thing then, as they were trying to look out for so many people who were starving. And there was a collapse in 1867 of the economy. So there were a lot of people, struggling. Mm-hmm.
And
certainly the system wasn't perfect, but they were fortunate to have in charge General O. Howard, Otis Oliver Howard, who came to be known as the Christian General. He had lost an arm fighting for the North during the Civil War in the Union Army. And we were very fortunate at least to have a compassionate man heading up this program for the time that it was.
And I know that the American Missionary Association continued with schools for freedmen on into, well, I have a number of their publications. The earliest one I have is just 1870, so it's sometime, it's a good while after the forming of the Bureau. But even going into, I think the latest one I have is in the late 70s, and there's still reports on schools that were established by the American Missionary Association that served freedmen in the South.
Yes, and then the thing too, there's a lot of controversy too, especially since my great-grandfather was Lumbee, where Native Americans were taken to these schools and then their hair cut and say you can't speak your language. And I've seen documentaries where they say they were beaten, knuckles wrapped or whatever if you tried to speak your own language. So in a way, now we know it was abuse. They took children away from their parents and put them in these places, under the perception of we're teaching them, we're keeping them from being uncivilized. But
which went on out in the West, as well for years and years.
Yes.
With Native American schools in the West.
Yeah, and so many, and they made them into dormitories. So they had to sleep there. So you think about a little child who's taken away from his parent. He's 2 years old and he's taken to this place where people say, well, you have to dress like this. You can't speak your language. And so a lot of times what they did find out, one of the positive things about some of these schools is that they have a list of like the students, and you'll notice here's a 9-year-old child and you see a man that's 40 and, listed right next to him. So adults were going to the schools too, learning how to read and write.
Gigi, as usual, you have brought us a piece of African-American history that we otherwise would not be familiar with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'd just like to remind all of our listeners that the Best Richardson African Diaspora Literature and Cultural Museum in Tampa, Florida. If you can't get there personally, you can take a tour of Gigi's museum online. Visit them at BRADLC Museum. Those are the first 3 letters of the Best Richardson African Diaspora Literature and Cultural Museum.
And you can also order books.
That's the other
thing. And I had, just 2 books I wanted to show you that had information about the Freedmen's Bureau.
Fire away.
Atlas of African American History. That's a book we have in our collection. And there's another one by William Powell called North Carolina Through 4 Centuries. So these are 2 books that have information about the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay. It's been a pleasure as usual.
All right, folks. And if you want those books, check out the Best Richardson African American Diaspora Cultural Museum.
No, it's not American. It's diaspora. Diaspora means, spreading of people through many places. So it's not American. It's African diaspora because we cover people. Yes, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, all these different places.
The rest of the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay. Thank you, Gigi.
You're welcome. You have a blessed day.
All right. Stay out of the sun.
Okay, I will. Okay, bye-bye, Lee.
Bye.
Bye, Ed.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, now it's time for David Hess from Orange Man Bookstore in Orange County, California. A favorite of all of our listeners. Anybody who deals in old books very likely has come across a cookbook or 2. I know that I have. David Hess, host of our popular weekly feature, Things Found in Old Books, has been poking around in a 1929 Hollywood cookbook. Hollywood, eh? He's also been looking at some other discoveries. Take it away, David. Share with us what you found this week.
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, welcoming you to another segment of Things Found in Old Books. And we've got some stuff found. I'm going to share with you today, and thank you for joining. We'll start off with a cookbook. Now, I find cookbooks a lot, and a lot of times there are a lot of recipes cut up from other sources, newspapers, magazines, and put in the cookbook. And this is no different. Probably the only difference is the age. This is called Fashions in Beverly Hills. Fashions and Foods in Beverly Hills. So this is a Beverly Hills cookbook, and it's got a lot of movie star recipes. Some of the old-timey movie stars, Hal Roach. There's a number of them here. And anyway, so what they did was have this Beverly Hills cookbook with a lot of interesting illustrations throughout. But there was a lot of recipes laid into the books that I thought were interesting because of the age. I found one here. It says, "Be famous for your baking," and it's from Calumet baking powder, and they teach you all kinds of things to do with Calumet baking powder. Now, there's no date on this, but looking at it, I would say, 1940s. The book itself is from 1929. I did forget to mention that, but it's from 1929, the book. And so there's that. And in here, they teach you how to make Yukoi, Ukoy, which is something I've never heard of. I'm sure I'm a baking ignoramus, but I've never heard of Yukoi or Bimbingika. Anyway, and griddle cakes. So I know griddle cakes. So there's that. There's Ann Campbell's favorite recipes. And there's, again, just a little booklet from Ann Campbell's recipes. And it was a little poem about being a good cook. Inside, a little further down into our book, I have magazine articles or newspaper articles with a little loving care is all your face requires. But on this side here is the recipes from Martha Grayson. Maybe she was a famous cook. I don't know. Anyway, so again, all kinds of little clippings from the old days, cut right out of the newspaper. Just to show you that they've been in the book for a long time. You can see where the newspaper acid is bleeded right onto the page. I thought this one little recipe was interesting, not for the recipe itself, which is that for baked round steak and apple tapioca. On the back it says there's a little article about Jackson Graves, banker, injured. Jackson A. Graves, head of the Farmers and Merchants National Bank, suffered a broken rib yesterday when he fell for reaching for a book at his home in Alhambra. The pioneer banker will be confined to his bed for several days, it was stated at his home. So the fact that two things I'm taking from this. The fact that they felt it was newsworthy that this banker broke his rib and had to stay at home made the newspaper. I found kind of interesting. And the second, collecting books and having books, it could be a dangerous thing. So people, all your book collectors, be careful, because I don't want you to break a rib reaching for your books. It might happen. And again, we have more. This is Watkins Coca. Again, you can tell from the back that it's probably from the 20s or 30s. This little advertising here for the Watson Coca, and I just find this stuff just quite fascinating. There's more too. I won't share everything here, but the book's it's just full of things like that, and handwritten recipe. I have no idea how old it is, but you can tell by the handwriting that it's probably from the same vintage as all this other stuff. Some of the stuff is from the 50s, and some of the stuff from the 30s and 20s. And well, that's the first thing. I did find that. Again, like I said, I find a lot of cookbooks with stuff all through it. But this was especially interesting to me. And I have this John O'Hara book. John O'Hara. There's really no date. It's a book club edition. So I don't know how old the book is. It's from the 60s, 50s maybe. And but inside, folded up, I did find this thing here. Unfold that. Footprints. Register your identity, it says here. And then has a little footprints. Gloria Jean Toft. It was Hollywood Hospital, Los Angeles, California, in November 1940. Now it's right there. But it's not signed by the doctor, but the father signed it at the bottom. A little footprints, and on the back, it has a little bit about first smile is 6 weeks old, December 10th. The first registered smile of little Gloria. And the first laugh was just a week later. After she smiled, she had a laugh. And first auto ride was 10 days old. So I wonder how they got her home from the hospital. Anyway, she walked at 1 year and 10 days. My guess is she might be still with us today. So Gloria, if you're out there somewhere and you're watching this, I'll hold it for you. It's yours. You can have it. And finally, I have this thing I found in a book. Sorry, I don't have the book with me today. It's called Holiday on Ice. Now, that's a holiday on ice. It's inside. You get a little bit of what's going to happen, because what this is a holiday on ice order form. You order your tickets here. It's from 1947. It's the 1947 show in the Norfolk Auditorium. That's in Virginia. So I did a little research on the auditorium. I believe it's still there, and it's had a lot of great events there. It's quite a small, unassuming auditorium. It's had a lot of great events at the auditorium, and one of the events in 1947 was the Holiday on Ice. It has its own ice floor the first big time ice show, the world's largest portable ice rink, and they got some stars of the day going to be doing the acts, including a skating horse. So that's coming October 4th through October 10th. Don't miss it. You got time to send in your orders now. And that's all I have for today. And if you have anything that you would like to share, please don't hesitate to send me a photo and a little description of what you found, and it would be my pleasure to share it here on this little broadcast. Send it to oldbook@ebookman.com. That's oldbook@ebookman.com. And a photo and a description, and we'll share it here. It'd be my pleasure. Thank you for stopping by, and it's been fun doing this with you today and all days. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you. My name is David from the Bookman in Orange. Bye-bye.
I love that little Gloria Toft piece of ephemera with her footprints on one side and her growth history on the other. That was so cool. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the type of thing that shows up at the Ephemera Society of America's upcoming online fair. You know, being in this type of business, when you find things out there that are first person relatable to an individual, it's just the connection is just so exciting. You may never know that person, but at least that you know that they existed. That's why I like signed books and journals and diaries and letters. I just enjoy so much picking up that kind of material. David, if you're interested in letting that little birth foot certificate go, give me a shout if it's for sale. All right, everybody. Coming up is Richard Morey checking back in with us from the Brimfield Fair. Richard, hello. How did it go out there?
Well, Ed, I think the word wet would be a good description.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it rained pretty much sometime during every day. We had two major storms go through. Both storms managed to take out a few tents, and but amazingly enough, there's a Brimfield attitude and a Brimfield spirit. The show goes on, and people show up, and it just keeps happening.
Well, the only thing books hate more than fire is water, so I hope there wasn't much damage.
Well, for me, not so, but I don't know about others, but it's quite likely it did cause some with other people. But I have a wonderful spot up on the porch at the Brimfield Antique Center, and I don't ever worry about water.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure you walked the show as well. What did you find out there?
Well, actually, one of the finds we're going to do another time, and I'm going to tell you about it just briefly today, but show it to you another time. I found a very rare Dr. Seuss puzzle. So, unfortunately, I spent the week actually unplanned in Florida, and I didn't get back last night until midnight, and I didn't get to my warehouse, so I can't. That was the schedule got disrupted, and so I didn't get to do what I thought we were going to do earlier in the week.
Just a reason to have you back, Richard. Just another reason to have you back.
But I did bring some things back from Florida. I bought a wonderful collection while I was in Florida this week, and I'm going to introduce you to someone you don't know. And the wonderful thing about the book world is that we cross over to a lot of other things. And I've discovered an artist, and a good friend of mine introduced me to him and sold me some of his collection, Andrew Stevovich. And I don't know, I'm going to see if this works. Can you see the book, Ed?
I can, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So this is Andrew Stevovich. This book is from 2002. It's called Beasts and Citizens, 40 Fables of La Fontaine. And I've got a piece of art here that you can see. He's known as a minimalist in his style, but he's just a wonderful man. He's actually originally born in Austria, but lives in the United States now. He came here in 1950 as a very young lad. And he's got these wonderful arts and illustrations. This is actually a limited edition of 135 copies, and it comes with a suite of 8 prints. I think if I can pull this out here, I don't know if you can see this, but it's got this wonderful suite of 8 prints, and I am just excited. And these are in the series of 135. This is a set of 50 signed limited. Are you seeing that?
Richard, I just did a quick search, and some of his material goes for 5 digits.
Yeah, it's very, very pricey, and he's I think he's yet to be discovered, to be honest, in my thinking. I've actually picked up some other things of his as well. This is just a gorgeous piece. I was reading a little bit about him to learn more, and he studied actually as a young boy. He used to walk through the National Gallery in Washington D.C., and he kind of harkens back to the Renaissance period, but he's got a modernistic interpretation with a minimalist style. It's really fascinating.
I'm checking him out right now. It is some very nice material. Still a young man.
Yeah, I'd like to say so, considering he's only a year older than I am.
Oh,
so it's
Richard, we
but-
just had Dr. Jim Clark on from talking about Florida. Whereabouts in Florida are you picking up your material, or where did you go shopping?
Well, I was actually I went down to the Villages to see a friend, and he was letting go of some material, and he asked me to come down and buy it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and I've visited him before, and I've known of this man's art, but I had never owned any of it. So this is, I think, going to be fun for me. I'm going to develop a little bit more of a knowledge base around this man, and start watching for stuff. One of the things I've learned is that he does a lot of his pre-production work in black and white, and then he'll the final edition will be in color. So you get a transition from the minimalist lines in black and white into a wonderful, rich color palette that he has. So he really crosses into the modern realm real quickly with that.
Let me ask both of you a question, Lee and Richard. You know, I hear young booksellers come up to me all the time and say, "Where do you find your material?" And I mean, nobody wants to give away their secret sources. And sometimes it's just a friend, and sometimes you got to drive 1,500 miles to see your friend. But what advice would you give young book dealers, people getting into business, on where to keep their eyes out open for material?
Well, I have always been fascinated with finding things in what I call the wild. I'm going to just pan around. I'm at a flea market in Maine again this weekend, and I don't know if you can see the tables out behind me here.
Sure.
This is the market. Now the market's quieted down. The activity starts here at 5 o'clock in the morning. So this is now the lull where
Okay.
you know there's a few dealers that'll hang in here till 2, 3 o'clock. We're actually having one of the most remarkable Maine days. It's 75 degrees. There's not a cloud in the sky. Well, I guess on the horizon there's a cloud, but it's just this beautiful blue sky. I don't know if you can see it in my camera shot here. It's just gorgeous here today. So I get to enjoy the beauty of this in the scenery. But at 5 o'clock this morning, I was out buying books.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes you have to pony up the dollars to buy the good things. And sometimes you get lucky and you find some great stuff. It's
How about you,
also,
Lee? What would you tell a young book dealer to do to
a couple
find
of things.
material?
Flea markets can be a lot of fun because you do run across things that you know somebody just brought because they thought it might be interesting and have no idea what they have sometimes. Another thing is once people find out that you deal in books, a lot of people will say, "Oh, I have all these old books," and usually they're not worth anything and they have no interest. But don't ever turn down an opportunity to look at books because you don't ever know what you're going to find. And and if you are like in a antique mall or something, you know, just because something doesn't look like it's interesting, don't dismiss it. Take your time. One of the best finds we ever had looked like a store ledger or something. It was a leather bound, you know, big book. Excuse me. It turned out to be a book of sheet music that someone had compiled. It had a copy of the second edition of the Star Spangled Banner in it. And it was $14. Excuse me.
$14 for the Star Spangled Banner.
And we took it, showed it to a friend at a book fair a few months later, who had some experience with early music, and his first thing was, he said, "You know what I really want to do is buy it from you, but I'm not going to do that to you." And he suggested that we contact a big time dealer in music, who then sold it for us because they had contacts. They sold it to an institution. They had contacts that we would never have had. And it was the largest sale that Bridge Books has ever made. And yet it was the kind of thing you could just, it wasn't with books. It was just on a table with stuff, the kind of stuff that shows up. And it didn't look like it was going to be anything interesting. And we didn't even find the Star Spangled Banner until we got it home and started looking through it. So don't dismiss anything, without looking, and don't, when a friend calls and says, I know somebody who's got all these old books, go look.
Yeah. Well,
good advice from both of you.
I would certainly echo that, Ed. The only thing I would add is, in the flea market world, you gotta have knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to have a trained eye. You don't have to know everything about everything, but you have to have a hunch and a sense about things, because without that, you will never find what really needs to be found.
Right.
Very good.
And
what else have you got for us?
I mean, looking for stuff is, I think that's one thing we've all missed the last year, is being out there looking for stuff.
ABL, always be looking. Richard,
Sure.
What else do you have for us?
Well, I did get one more thing that's really exciting. Many of those who know me know I'm a big Tasha Tudor fan. I had the pleasure of working with Tasha twice back in the 90s. The second time with both her daughters, the only time they ever appeared as a family together in public like that. So I've always been fascinated by that. And quite honestly, what I really got, those who have been around and know Tasha Tudor, this is Tasha Tudor's first book, Pumpkin Moonshine, in the dust jacket. It's a wonderful copy in the blue calico cover. And that was a real treat. And quite honestly, this is not going to probably go in the market right away. This was gifted to me as part of the trip. And it will be a nice addition to what I have as a fairly large Tudor collection. That collection will someday down the road be sold, either in part or in whole. And but this was a really wonderful find. You don't find the jacket on this very often. I've had multiple copies of this over the years, but this is one of the nicer ones.
Her first book in 1938.
Exactly. So that was a wonderful piece, and there were some other Tudor items that did come with it that I will be putting in the market. The unfortunate thing is the 22 boxes of books that I bought are still in Florida. I only was able to bring back a few things on the plane. So that collection, a lot of that stuff is going to show up. Guess where, Ed, for the very first time next April?
The New England Book Fair?
No, the
Florida Book Fair.
Thank you, the Florida Book Fair.
Okay.
So those who attend the Florida Book Fair, I bought a wonderful collection of pop-ups, including including some Megendorfers. So it'll be exciting at the book fair next year in April. I am so looking forward to that event.
And you don't have to haul the material back home.
That's exactly right.
Clever guy. No wonder you've lasted in this industry for so long.
Was that a compliment, Ed?
With the back of my hand. Very good. All right, Richard, we look forward to having you back again. Thanks so much for sharing your finds in Brimfield and Florida and a little bit of book history.
Yeah, it's always fun. Thanks, Ed.
Ciao. All right, everybody. Lee, let's bring Lee back in here. I wanted to mention, we were talking earlier about, or Gigi was talking about the Freedmen's Bureau. And I made the comment that it was headed up by General O.O. Howard, who, in the world of irony, happens to be whom the Howard University is named after. A historically black university in America named after a white general. However, the work that he did with the Freedmen's Bureau was so recognized. After he retired, he was on the board of the university, and they named the university after him. So
I did not know that.
A remarkable turn in irony in African American history.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're coming up close to the end of the show. Next week, our guest is going to be the semi-regular contributor, Larry Rakow of Wonderland Books in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Larry is going to be sharing with us the American iteration of children's book series that began in Germany. The American version, popular in the 19th century, was called Slovenly Peter. You probably read it, or at least read it to your kids or grandkids. There are stories about a boy who practiced less than ideal hygiene and the consequences of such his behavior. I think I'm going to the dentist next week, and I've got some consequences as well. All right. Also next week, Mary Kay Watson will be returning from her wonderful wedding anniversary vacation to Chicago, where she visited the ever-famous Printers Row, a destination for all book lovers headed to Chi-Town. She'll have a report on her travels. Lee Lynn will be back next week with her book club. Are you still there, Lee?
Yes, I am. And we have a special
Give us
treat.
a quint.
We have a special treat
All
next
right.
week also.
Lee seems to maybe have dropped off, but I know she'll be back with more stories next week. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. The Rare Book Cafe, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. You can always find us here on YouTube or on Facebook. That's it, folks. See you next week.